All right, good evening, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and call to order the regular meeting of Oregon City Council for January 22nd of 2024, and the time is 7:08 PM. If you'd all join me in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. To start off our meeting, Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call of council, please?
Mrs. Ackerman. Here. Mr. Drake.
Here.
Mr. Horniak.
Here.
Mrs. Paula. Here. Mr. Reeves.
Here.
Mr. Salander.
Here.
Mr. Wallensack.
Here. Thank you. Please note that all council members are here. In addition to council members being here, we have Mayor Mike Safarian, City Administrator Joel Mazer, Clerk of Council Cassie Rawson, Law Director Melissa Propora, Public Service Director Paul Roman, Chief of Police Brandon Began, Assistant Chief of Police Ryan Spangler, Fire Chief Clayton O'Brien, Assistant Fire Chief Mark Mullins, Finance Director Nick Roman, also joining us this evening. Council, with that said, the first item up for tonight would be the approval of minutes of the January 8th special meeting, the January 8th regular council meeting, and the January 16th committee of the whole meeting.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
I move to accept the minutes as presented from January 8th, the special meeting, January 8th, the regular meeting, and January 16th, the committee of the whole meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Salander. We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Moving on, our next item would be persons and delegations. I don't have anybody signed in to speak this evening. Is there anybody that wishes to address council this evening? Hearing none, we'll move on. We're going to have a little adjustment to the agenda this evening. We do have an appointment, and rather than wait till the end of the meeting, we're going to move to the mayor's report now, so we can do that at the top of the meeting. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I think council are aware of the fact that Marty Zeller has retired as a supervisor in the streets department. And for the replacement, I'm going to ask council's concurrence in the appointment of Mr. Timothy Shanks, 745 North Stadium Road, Oregon, Ohio, to the position of street supervisor. And he will be placed in the pay range 28, hourly rate $39.65 an hour, which is an annual rate of $82,477.98. The effective date will be tomorrow, January 23rd, 2024. And once again, I would ask for council's concurrence in the appointment to Mr. Tim Shanks for that position.
Thank you, Mayor. Council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Drake.
I concur with the mayor on hiring Mr. Timothy Shanks, 45 North Stadium Road, Oregon, Ohio, to step 8 as a
Step 4.
step 4. I'm sorry. I still can't see with my glasses.
You want to move as presented?
Yes.
Thank you. We have a concurrence from Mr. Drake, a second from Mrs. Pauloff. Council, any objections to the appointment? Hearing none, the appointment is made. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And Tim's here. Got anything to say, or if you just want to leave, you can do that too. We usually expect 15, 20 minutes or something.
Usually a song, something.
Yeah.
No.
All right, get that out of here.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Council, we'll move into tonight's agenda. And we did have a committee of the whole meeting on items 3, 4, 5, and 6. However, items 7 and 8 are being presented for consideration and passage this evening. Both were mentioned briefly in last week's committee of the whole, although the ordinances were not quite ready yet. We'll have Mr. Roman speak to both of them when time comes. I'll seek a motion to move those to this evening's agenda.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Second by Mrs. Pauloff. Council, are there any objections to adding items 7 and 8 to this evening's agenda? Hearing none, items 7 and 8 are added to the agenda. First item on the agenda this evening is item number 3 of 2024, presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Public Service Director Paul Roman. And we'll go to Mr. Roman. We did have a committee of the whole meeting on the first 4 items this evening. So if there's additional questions, Mr. Roman, I ask you just for a real brief high level of each of these, just for reconsideration. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. President. As presented last week, this is the first item. Item 3 is a tractor that's to be used mainly for snow removal, but it can be used for multiple purposes: seeding, brushing, just general maintenance around the municipal complex. Can also be used on overpasses. So, that's it. It's through a federal purchasing contract as well. So, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any questions? Hearing none, I'll assign item number 3 of 2024 as ordinance number 3 of 2024 and ask Ms. Rawson to read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to issue a purchase order to Century Equipment, 2266 East Aurora Road, Twinsburg, Ohio, for the purchase of a Ventrac tractor NT with accessories to be used in the street division in the Department of Public Service in an amount not to exceed $31,353 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council.
Mr. President,
Mr. Drake.
I move for passage of item 003-2024 as an emergency.
Okay, ordinance 3, we have a motion.
Second.
Second by Mr. Reeves. Ms. Rawson, will you take a roll call of council on ordinance 3 of 2024, please?
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman? Yes. Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mrs. Paula?
yes,
Mr. Slander?
Yes.
And Mr. Wallensack.
Yes.
Thank you, council. Ordinance 3 of 2024 passes with a vote of 7 yeas and 0 nays. Next item on the agenda for consideration is item 4, again presented by Mayor Mike Safarian and Public Service Director Paul Roman. Paul, again, any brief overview, and then we'll open for additional questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. This was a first change order for the current wastewater treatment plant project. And we talked over some of the items, but all of this item and all of our items tonight were included in the 2024 budget, including this. And we're still working on another change order with Kirk Brothers, but this is the first one. But again, it was planned and budgeted for. So again, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council. Hearing no questions, I will assign item number 4 of 2024 as ordinance number 4 of 2024 and ask Ms. Rawson to read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to issue purchase orders to SNF Paladine 1 Chemical Plant Road, Riceboro, Georgia, for the purchase of a Clarafloc C6266, a dewatering polymer for the wastewater treatment plant, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council.
I read my notes to the Kirk Brothers change order, just so you know. The polymer is something used for dewater. We purchase that every year, and there is no change in cost from last year. I'm sorry, Mr. President, I just want to make that clear.
Okay, so you were actually speaking to item 5
I was.
instead of item 4.
I was.
Item 4
I apologize.
as we presented. Okay.
Yep.
All right, so we have ordinance 4 2024 read into the record. We'll seek a motion.
Mr. President,
Mr. Salander.
I'd like to make a motion for passage of 004-2024 as an emergency as presented.
Thank you.
second,
Second by Mrs. Paula. Ms. Ross, will you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Salander?
Yes.
Mrs. Paula?
yes,
Mrs. Ackerman? Yes. Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Wallensack?
Yes.
Thank you, council. Ordinance 4 of 2024 passes with a vote of 7 yeas and 0 nays. Moving on to item 5, which I think Paul just discussed. Anything to add on to that, Paul?
No, Mr. President.
Okay, council, any questions? Hearing none, I will assign item 5 of 2024 as ordinance number 5 of 2024 and ask Ms. Rawson to read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, director of public service, and finance director to sign a change order number 1 with Kirk Bros Co., Inc., 16380 US 224 East, Findlay, Ohio, in an amount of a net contract addition of $84,195.45 due to additional work related to the Oregon wastewater treatment plant safety, disinfection, and grit removal improvement project and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Rossing. Council.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
I move for passage of ordinance 5 of 2024 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Second by Mr. Wallenczak. Mr. Rossing, will you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenczak?
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman? Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mrs. Paula?
Yes.
Mr. Slander?
Yes.
Thank you, council. Ordinance 5 of 2024 passes with a vote of 7 yeas and 0 nays. Next item on the agenda is item 6 of 2024, and again, we'll go to Mr. Roman.
Thank you, Mr. President. As mentioned last week, we have a current agreement with Evergreen Landfill. We have a barter exchange agreement where we treat their leachate from the landfill at no cost, and at the same time, they take our dried sludge from the wastewater plant and landfill it at no cost. It's been a very good an agreement. It's worked out very well. And both parties have met and would like to extend it another 5 years. We did have already in there that we can go year to year, but on a financial point of view, in terms of budgeting, it is nice to have a 5-year term. So that's the only thing we're changing, is extending it to December 31st of 2028 versus from what we had before was 23. So that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any questions? Comment? Hearing none, I will assign item 6 of 2024 as ordinance 6 of 2024 and ask Ms. Rawson to read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to enter into an amended agreement with Evergreen Recycling and Disposal Facility, Inc., 2625 East Broadway Road, Northwood, Ohio, and in order to extend a leachate and sludge disposal agreement for an additional 5-year period, including terms listed in the amendment per attached Exhibit A, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council.
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallenczak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move for passage of ordinance number 6 of 2024 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenczak.
Second.
Second by Mr. Salander. Ms. Rawson, will you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Wallenczak?
Yes.
Mr. Salander?
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman? Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mrs. Paula?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Thank you, council. Ordinance 6 of 2024 passes with a vote of 7 yeas and 0 nays. Next item on the agenda is item 7 of 2024, again presented by Mayor Mike Safarian and Public Service Director Paul Roman, and I believe we'll go to Mr. Roman direct on this.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is needed to purchase survey equipment for the Public Service Department or the engineers.
Okay.
And purchase, again, was included in the 2024 budget. Our current survey equipment is about 10 years old. It still works, but it's not as accurate as the newer systems. There's a lot more satellite reads with the newer systems, and even leveling it. And there's what's called I guess a tilt compensation when the guy is holding the rod. The new equipment can automatically calculate those reads. So our plan would be to sell our old system on Gov Deals. We think we could get $3,000 to $4,000 for it, hopefully. And Precision Laser is the sole vendor for Trimble equipment. We've always used Trimble. It is the main survey equipment for a lot of construction firms and engineering firms. So the request is to proceed with Precision Laser as the vendor. And then they are also through the state purchasing contract. They did give us some discounts that go further, but this is through the state purchasing contract as well. So that's it.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any comments or questions?
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallenczak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Roman, do we do any training or is there software updates that generally get added to these where they can be improved over the years? And then can you buy into a contract to automatically get those upgrades?
And Mr. President, Mr. Wallenczak, we've done that in the past with your old equipment. We'll do that again with this newer equipment. Vince is very close to getting a surveyor's license, and he does some of this work, but we all will use it from time to time. I use it the least, but I can tell you that when there is training, we do get it when we can get it. So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenczak. Council, any other questions or comments?
Mr. President.
Mr. Drake.
Yeah, I got a question. I don't know who to answer this. Paul might know, or Melissa. When you put items like that on Gov Deal, and I guess, would you put something on there that if you know it's broken,
Yeah, you just got to describe what
You let them know if
you
it's
think is
broken.
right or wrong, yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. Any other comments or questions, council? Hearing none, I will assign item number 7 of 2024 as ordinance number 7 of 2024 and ask Ms. Rawson to read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to issue a purchase order to Precision Laser and Instrument, Inc., 85 11th Street, Ambridge, Pennsylvania, for the purchase of the Trimble R780 GPS survey system for the Department of Public Service in an amount not to exceed $28,916.10 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President.
Mr. Wollenzak.
Thanks, Mr. President. I move for passage of ordinance number 7 of 2024 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Wollenzak.
Second, go ahead.
Second by Mrs. Paula. Ms. Rawson, will you please take a roll call vote of council, please?
Mr. Wollenzak,
Yes.
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman, Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Salander.
Yes.
Thank you, council. Ordinance 7 of 2024 passes with a vote of 7 yeas and 0 nays. We'll move on to item 8 of 2024, and we'll start with the mayor. Mayor Sferrin?
Thank you, Mr. President. And Council, you see this correspondence from Mary Wolf. We had originally accepted Yark as the provider for this vehicle, and it seems as though they sold it out from under us. And so for additional $760, it looks like Dunn's can fulfill this requirement for this vehicle. So we're asking council to approve the purchase of the vehicle for water distribution from Dunn Chevy O's, so we can fill that need.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Roman, anything additional to add?
Just that this was a budgeted item, and as I mentioned in budget, the plan was the engineers were looking for another used vehicle and something that wasn't as beat as what we've inherited in the past, and the hope was to get a newer vehicle. And that was the ask. Mary was also looking for a bigger vehicle, and the Chevy Traverse was her preference, let's say. And that's why we went down this road. But yeah, it was kind of odd, and it gets tough now. The 2024 vehicles are 6 months out, and they'll be easily, they've told Mary, 6 to 8 grand more. So if we could still get a 2023 this year, or at this point, we felt pretty lucky. We knew it was a risk with Yark, and they wouldn't take money down, and they sold it over the weekend. So that's how it worked out. But Dunn's is only good till the 31st. So.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any questions or comments on item 8 of 2024?
Say it's a new world.
Give a salesman a chance to sell something, they're going to sell something. So, all right, hearing no questions or comments, I would present item 8 of 2024 as ordinance 8 of 2024 and ask Ms. Rawson to read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to issue a purchase order to Dunn Chevrolet, 3000 Dustin Road, Oregon, Ohio, for the purchase of one 2023 Chevrolet Traverse 1LS all-wheel drive vehicle to be used by the Oregon Water Distribution Division personnel and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President.
Mr. Wollenzak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move for passage of ordinance 8 of 2024 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Wollenzak.
Second,
Second by Mr. Reeves. Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council on ordinance 8 of 2024, please?
Mr. Wollenzak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
yes.
Mrs. Ackerman, Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mr. Slander.
Yes.
Thank you, council. Ordinance 8 of 2024 passes with a vote of 7 yeas and 0 nays, which concludes all the agenda items for the evening. However, we do have a liquor permit transfer to be considered this evening. And just to remind council, our consideration of this is whether to check the box for a hearing or whether to proceed without a formal hearing. It is a change in ownership due to, I believe, a percentage change in the makeup of owners from Big Apple Deli to Big Apple Deli. So council, are there any questions in regard to the liquor permit transfer? Hearing none, I'd seek a motion to check or not check the box.
Mr. President,
Ms. Pollitt.
After reviewing all the information presented, I kindly instruct the clerk to mark that we do not request a hearing at this time.
Thank you, Mrs. Polliff.
Second.
Second by Mr. Wolanzak. Council, any objections? Hearing none, we'll instruct the clerk to check the box that we do not request a hearing at this time for this liquor transfer. Having considered all item agendas for this evening, we'll move to the mayor's report. Mayor Safarian.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no report.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Mazer.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Purpura.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Purpura. Mr. Roman.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Mr. Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. President. We had a Parks and Recreation Committee meeting this evening at 6 o'clock, and the purpose was for pickleball courts, which we're gonna move forward with lighting. And then we also discussed Boom Fest of upping the ante a little bit, and I believe that's gonna come to us through an ordinance, but it was approved to move that up, so we should be seeing an ordinance coming up pretty soon for that. And I just want to thank everybody for their time and effort, and if I'd have known we were gonna have as big a crowd, we probably should have held it out here, so I apologize for the confusion or the lack of room for people and how cozy it was, but I think that's the way Mr. Roman Nick likes it. He likes to have everybody in one room so he can dictate what we're doing. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Mrs. Polliff.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a reminder, February 5th, Monday, is a safety committee meeting at 6 PM in regards to the Lucas County EMS contract and the public-driven strategic plan. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Polliff. Mr. Wolanzak.
Thank you, Mr. President. No report this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Wolanzak. Ms. Ackerman.
Nothing from my committee, but I did want to share that I attended the TMACOG General Assembly last Friday with Councilman Drake, and I know Steve had to work. Joel was there, and I thought it was really valuable. I wasn't sure what to expect, but the focus when we got into our roundtable discussion with the cities was the same as shortage of recruits for police, fire, and dispatch. And that seemed to be across the board through all the cities. And so that was really I've heard of that, but to see a whole room of the entire area all agree that that was an ongoing issue was pretty troublesome for me. I wanted to give a shout out to Councilman Drake because he was the only person that throughout the course of the day mentioned a concern about what's lacking with the 911 consolidation as far as public safety. And so I really appreciated him bringing that to their attention.
Thank you, Ms. Ackerman. Mr. Salander.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Salander. Mr. Drake.
No report.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. And I have no report from my standing committee. Do want to report back on something I had asked and mentioned last week. The online calendar that is available on the city's website. Asked Ms. Rawson to look into adding additional meetings and items on there. That has been completed. So any meeting that is set by the city, whether it's a council meeting, whether it's a zoning board, if there's a committee meeting, those will be added and updated to the website, and they have been added and updated as of late last week. So thank you to Mrs. Rawson for being able to do that. With that said, council, there's no other business before us this evening. I would entertain a motion for adjournment. Mr. Reeves.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Second by Mr. Salander. Council, any objections to adjournment? Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.